What if Little Simz was produced by the Bomb Squad? Find out on this week's What If, How, When, Why. Hello, I'm Morgan Brown, and this week I uploaded a video to my What If playlist, which attempted to answer the question, what if Little Simz was produced by the Bomb Squad? If you're not familiar with the premise of these videos that I've been doing, the idea is each week I take a different popular song and imagine an alternative universe scenario in which a different set of circumstances or a decision that someone made caused that song to come out completely different. So this week I thought it would be fun to take one of my favourite current UK rappers and then see how one of her popular tracks would have sounded if it had been produced in a completely different decade, back in the 1980s, on the other side of the Atlantic, and produced by one of the most iconic production teams in all of hip hop. So, took the isolated original a cappella vocal from Gorilla by Little Simz, and then attempted, using my very limited means, just garage band and whatever instruments I have kicking around in the house, to try and fashion a hip hop beat. The first hip hop beat I've ever attempted to make. Tried to fashion a beat that was at least vaguely reminiscent of the great work by the Bomb Squad. So if you haven't heard that yet, sounds a little bit like this.
Simz, who got the keys to my blood clot? Mima, big time thriller, monkey to gorilla. Who is this woman that I'm seeing in the mirror? Drink 42 and smoke cigar. Name one time where I didn't deliver. Silent figure, I was just on the ends, dropping gems with my friends. I got a 3310 and a pack of blems.
So I'm hoping most of you are familiar with Little Simz, to some extent at least. If you're not, I know she's not broken quite as big outside the UK. I definitely recommend checking out her work. Absolutely incredible rapper. Been active for maybe a little over 10 years now. I must admit I was quite late to catch on and generally fairly out of touch where it comes to hip hop. I first heard her during COVID lockdown. I was listening to the radio quite a lot, and quite early on into COVID lockdown, she released an EP called Drop 6, and BBC Six Music Radio picked up on a song called Might Bang Might Not. And I just heard that, and it was quite unlike anything I've ever heard before, really. Like, blew my mind. So picked up the most recent album at the time, which was Grey Area, which is fantastic again. And then I've been following her pretty avidly ever since. And Gorilla, the track that I chose to use, like the original version of it, definitely check out. Absolutely fantastic track. An incredible video as well, which is well worth watching, directed by Dave Meyers. The original, interestingly, for a song that I've picked to try and make sound old school, it's quite an old school production in the first place, but rather than sounding like the Bomb Squad, sounds a bit more like a kind of updated take on something that maybe Tribe Called Quest or De La Soul might have done. It's quite laid back, it's got a good swing to it, based around a jazz stand-up bass riff, with these really nice strings that remind me of the strings on Ode to Billy Joe by Bobby Gentry. That kind of like Southern soul kind of feel as well. And Simz has this great sort of laid back delivery, just kind of leaning back a little bit behind the beat all the way through. It's really cool. I should say as well, Inflo, who produced the original track, is absolutely amazing. He's been responsible for the production on Sim's last three albums, and he's quite remarkable, just the way, shifts between styles. So 1 minute you're listening to kind of the crunching kind of electronic backdrop. The next minute you've got proper widescreen cinematic orchestral productions. And then the next track you might be on a kind of like Afrobeat groove. Really, really remarkable stuff. And notably, very rarely uses samples. I'm pretty sure about 99% of the music on those records, although it might sound like it's pieced together from samples, is actually kind of played specifically for the record, which is a real contrast to how the Bomb Squad worked. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with the work of the Bomb Squad, but just to give you a quick potted history, the production team behind, most famously, Public Enemy, their classic albums, Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back, and Fear of a Black Planet, particularly the team of the Shockley brothers, with Carl Reidenauer, better known as Chuck D of Public Enemy, and Eric Vietnam Sadler. There are a couple of other guys who came and went at various points, but that's kind of the core team. And what they did really was they took hip hop production, which I guess the prevailing sound at the time was the kind of Run DMC thing, sort of fairly stark, drum machine and voice mainly, maybe like a little sample for the hook, but fairly kind of primitive, sparse kind of sound. And they just replaced that with just a barrage of noise. So the exact opposite of a minimalist approach, really. So starting with these hard driving kind of drum machine rhythms, sometimes multiple drum machines working at once, but then overlaying samples, snippets of classic funk records, bits of political speeches, white noise, sirens and alarms, just all these different elements colliding with each other in kind of quite dissonant, abrasive ways. Really urgent, kind of fiery, kind of hard-hitting sound, which isn't to say that they weren't capable of variety. If you listen to their full discography, there's quite a variety in there, but that's kind of the signature sound, and that's sort of what I was aiming for here. So in my alternative world scenario that I came up with for this, I just basically imagined a universe in which Little Simz was born 35 years earlier, so that instead of emerging into a thriving UK hip-hop scene, she was emerging into the kind of really nascent early days of UK hip-hop, which is a really tough time, I think, for anyone involved in that. There were definitely really talented people kicking around in the UK during the 80s, but record companies were absolutely not taking that music seriously. So it was a real rarity for someone like Derek B, for instance, who was one of the first UK rappers I ever heard. Real rarity for someone like that to be able to break through. Generally, a UK record label, if they presented rap at all, it was in the form of novelty records. So a lot of acts would do a one-off rap song to try and cash in on what was seen as a passing fad. Yeah, Wham, Adam and the Ants, people like that would do a one-off rap song. And then sort of popular entertainers of the day, Morris Minor and the Majors had a comedy hit with stutter rap. I think Roland Rat, the children's character, had a rap song. That's kind of how rap music was treated in UK popular culture at the time. So in my scenario, Little Simz is this talented rapper emerging into this environment. So no support at home, but she's making mixtapes. She's trying to distribute them through kind of grassroots circles. And in the kind of small world of hip hop at the time, somehow this mixtape gets across the Atlantic into the hands of the Bomb Squad, who invite her over to the US, and she ends up making an album with the Bomb Squad. And then obviously I make my version of Gorilla to try and show people how that would have sounded. In approaching this, the first step, obviously, as always, if you're doing one of these things with using an original lead vocalist to sync up the track to the grid, immediately I realized I was going to have to speed it up, because to get that signature Bomb Squad sound, the one that we think of at least, it really needs like quite an urgent tempo. Whereas Gorilla, the original one, is pretty laid back. It's quite chill. Chill is not what we think of when we think of the Bomb Squad. So cranked up the tempo and started out with drum machine rhythm. I did this with two different drum machines. I think I used like both kicks blended together, and then the hats from one kit and the snare from another. So set up a little loop with that. I played the parts in by hand and didn't over quantize it, because if you ever listen to the isolated tracks from like an old Public Enemy record or like the first Ice Cube record, a lot of those rhythms, like, they're not really precisely kind of robotically in time. There's quite a human element to them, so I wanted to keep that. I think a lot of the feel of those great records comes from the kind of the rhythmic tension of the kind of push and pull between these different elements, the different samples that don't quite 100% line up with this drum machine as well, which was played in by hand. So I wanted to make sure I kept that element in there, so nothing's kind of overly quantized or moved exactly onto the grid. having set up that drum machine rhythm, I wanted to try and make it as authentic as possible by building the track out of samples. But by making these videos, I'm already in a bit of a copyright minefield, so I didn't want to sample loads of different existing records and create even more issues for myself. So I decided that for the most part, I was going to create my own kind of pretend samples from different records, and then use those as building blocks to create the track. Did use a couple of samples from one particular record. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but if you have a listen, if you spot what it is, then well done, extra points for you. So I set about making my own pretend samples. I wanted to make sure I kept the main brass hook that bookends the original track. So I played that in myself using GarageBand horns. And then all of these samples I mixed down, adding in a bit of fake vinyl crackle and EQing it with a bit of a mid hump and taking off some bass and treble to make it sound like everything's been taken from a bit of a dusty old record. The horn hook, as I say, I played in on GarageBand horns, cut that out, turned it into a sample, and then each time I play it, I flip the end of the sample back and forth just to make it sound a little bit like someone's running the record back. And at the end, I added a little record scratch effect as well to make it sound like the DJ's yoinking the record off the turntable. I kept at least the same notes as the original record because that's a really important hook. But I didn't want to keep the more jazzy feel of the bass part of the original record, because for a Bomb Squad vibe, it was probably better to go for something that sounded a bit more like it's sourced from like a funk record. So I came up with a guitar riff, a bass riff, some drum fills. I attempted to recreate the classic Clyde Stubblefield funky drummer loop that crops up on pretty much everything the Bomb Squad ever did. Obviously, it doesn't sound like Clyde Stubblefield, me playing it on GarageBand drums, but I did my best. Rather than listing every single sample that I made, I'm just going to play them all in a row now, and you can hear how each one sounds on its own. So those were my building blocks, and then I just kind of took those and pieced them together, collage style, really, as the Bomb Squad would have done. Obviously, those guys who were working on tape, they couldn't see everything laid out on a grid like I can on GarageBand. So, I mean, it just really made me appreciate how incredible those productions were. It's almost inconceivable to me how you could sit there with a sampler, a drum machine, and some tape and create what they did, but it's absolutely amazing. So yeah, I just built up the tracks that way. Added in some record scratching effects, because normally, particularly on the Public Enemy records, you'd have Terminator X there, add in some scratching. Discovered that using the flex time feature of GarageBand, you can move the transients, like the little peaks of the waveform around, so you can actually move a sample of DJ scratching from something else entirely into time, so it sounds like the guy's scratching specifically to the track that you're making. So made great use of that. The only things I actually played directly onto the track are a couple of synthesizer lines, just because it was easier to do that than making a fake sample for it. So there's a low drone that just kind of modulates along, kind of bubbling away underneath it, and another synth that sounds a bit like a kind of alarm going off in the distance. Thought those were kind of good things to just underpin the track. One thing that I always like on old Bomb Squad records is when they use speech samples. There are a few notable uses of speeches on Public Enemy tracks. Quite often they'll use a fiery political kind of speech to capture the feel of the track. I obviously didn't want to use a political speech on this, because far be it from me to impose someone else's political views on Little Simz lyric. I don't want to do that. But Since Gorilla is basically a kind of classic bit of hip hop braggadocio, it's just kind of Simz finding increasingly inventive ways to tell the world how amazing she is. I thought having a sample of Simz herself kind of saying something to that effect would be really good. And as luck would have it, I just watched her set from Glastonbury Festival. Should still be up on BBC iPlayer. If you've not seen it, definitely check it out. Playing on the Pyramid stage in front of what must be like 100,000 people easily. And she says, "Right now, I need you to understand that you're witnessing greatness." And I thought that was such a powerful statement. So I thought, okay, that's my quote for the start of this track. So literally just recorded it off the TV onto voice notes on my phone, and then dropped that onto the track. Added some effects to make it sound like it's part of the record, and then stuck a long delay tail on it. And that made the intro to the record. I know I set myself an impossibly high bar this week, attempting to replicate the sound of, possibly the most iconic production team in all of hip hop history. There was no way I was ever going to be able to actually kind of properly accomplish that. But I feel like what I came up with, you know, for a first ever hip hop beat, it's actually pretty good. I don't know. To me, at least, it works. It casts a great hip hop song in a different light. So if you'd do me a favor and check it out, I'd really appreciate it. Also, definitely check out the original because it's just awesome. And if you like what I did, please click the like button, maybe subscribe, maybe leave me a little comment. Anything to help the algorithm would be great. And also, if you've got any ideas for any artists you'd like to see me take on in the future, or any styles of music you'd like to see me have a go at, I'm always on the lookout for any ideas. Can't promise I'll be able to do them, but I'll certainly give them a go. So just drop those in the comments as well. That would be awesome. So I'll have a new music video up on Sunday afternoon. And in the meantime, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you later.